The day had started like any other. She had just finished her long shift at the hospital and was driving home through the quiet streets of the city outskirts. The sky was beginning to fade into soft orange, and the air outside was cool with a slight smell of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening. She rolled down her window just a little to feel the breeze on her face. After 12 hours of work, that tiny moment of calm felt like a reward. She was tired but peaceful. Her small car hummed softly as she drove past the empty stretch of road leading toward her neighborhood. She thought about how she would reach home, take a quick shower, warm up some leftover soup, and maybe watch something light before sleeping. Life wasn't easy for her. Long shifts, constant tiredness, and a paycheck that barely covered her rent. But she didn't complain much. She had learned to find contentment in small things. A quiet evening, a good cup of tea, and the satisfaction of helping people every day. As she waited at a red light near the old highway, she reached for her bag to grab her phone. At that moment, a loud crash shattered the stillness. It was sudden, a metallic bang followed by the screech of tires and breaking glass. Her head jerked up and she saw a cloud of smoke not too far ahead. Her heart skipped. For a second, she froze, unsure of what she had just witnessed. Then she saw it clearly. A black SUV had collided with a large delivery truck. The SUV was crumpled at the front, its hood bent upward, smoke rising fast. Without a second thought, she threw her car into park, unbuckled her seatbelt, and ran toward the crash. The air smelled of burning rubber and gasoline. A faint flame flickered near the front of the SUV, and she could hear someone screaming faintly from inside. She didn't stop to think about the danger. Her instincts as a nurse kicked in before fear could take over. She pulled at the driver's side door, but it wouldn't open. The front was too damaged. She ran around to the passenger side, coughing as the smoke thickened. Through the tinted glass, she could barely see anyone in the front seat. Then her eyes shifted to the back and she froze. A small child was strapped into a car seat crying, his tiny hands hitting the sides of the seat in panic. "Hey, it's okay, hold on," she shouted, but her voice shook as she tried to sound calm. She pulled at the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. Her palms were slick with sweat and soot. She looked around desperately for something, anything, to break the glass. Nearby, a man from a nearby gas station had come running, shouting that he had called for help. She grabbed a small tire iron he handed her and swung it hard against the window. The first hit didn't break it. She hit it again and again until a spiderweb crack appeared, then shattered the glass completely. The smoke made it hard to breathe. The fire was spreading now. Orange light flickered dangerously from beneath the car. She leaned in through the broken window, coughing, and unbuckled the straps around the child. He was crying so hard that his little body shook. She tried to comfort him even as her hands trembled. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're going to be okay," she said, her voice breaking. She pulled him out carefully through the window. Just as she lifted him out, a burst of heat came from the engine and she stumbled back, clutching the boy tightly. She turned away from the car and ran toward the open road, shielding his head with her arms. The sound that followed made her heart lurch. A small explosion from under the hood. Flames shot up into the air. She dropped to her knees a few meters away, holding the boy close as he sobbed into her shoulder. Her lungs burned and tears streamed down her soot-streaked face, but she didn't care. He was alive. That was all that mattered. The man from the gas station came running with a fire extinguisher, shouting that help was on the way. She could barely hear him over the sirens growing louder in the distance. The boy clung to her neck, whimpering softly. She rocked him gently, whispering that it was over now. Moments later, firefighters and paramedics arrived. They pulled her aside to check for injuries, but she refused to let go of the child until she saw him being safely handed to another medic. When she finally stood, her knees were weak, and she realized how close she had been to serious harm. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to steady herself against the hood of a nearby car. One of the firefighters asked, "Ma'am, did you pull the child out yourself?" She nodded silently, still catching her breath. "You're lucky to be alive," he said softly. "If you hadn't acted when you did, that car would have gone up in flames with both of them inside." She looked back at the SUV. It was now completely engulfed. The flames hissed and cracked as the firefighters sprayed water over it. The truck driver was being treated nearby for minor injuries, dazed but alive. But the child's father, who had been in the front seat, was still being pulled out unconscious. She stared at the scene, her mind spinning. She didn't know who they were, but something deep inside her hoped they would both survive. She didn't feel like a hero, only terrified and relieved. As the paramedics led her to an ambulance to check her oxygen levels, she overheard one of the police officers saying something about the car's registration. It was registered to a big company, Mar, a name she recognized from the news. But she was too dazed to think about it. After giving her statement, she quietly walked back to her car. The police offered to drive her home, but she refused. She wanted to sit alone for a bit, to let the adrenaline wear off. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at her hands. They were covered in tiny cuts from the glass. Her hair smelled like smoke and her uniform was stained black. She looked at the empty passenger seat beside her and let out a long, shaky breath. Everything had happened so fast that it barely felt real. She could still hear the child's cries echoing in her mind. On the drive home, the city lights looked different, softer somehow. She couldn't explain it, but she felt changed. Not because of what she did, but because of what she had seen. How fragile everything was. How a normal evening could turn into something unforgettable in just a few seconds. When she finally reached home, she took off her shoes at the door and sat on the floor, exhausted. Her small apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She stared at the wall for a long time before realizing her hands were still trembling. Her phone kept buzzing with messages. People from work had seen the news already. A video of the rescue was spreading online. Someone must have recorded it, but she didn't open any of it. She didn't want to relive the moment. Instead, she walked to the bathroom, washed the soot from her face, and looked at her reflection. There were dark smudges around her eyes and tiny scratches on her cheeks. She barely recognized herself. She thought about the boy, about how scared he must have been. She wondered if he was safe now, if his father had survived. She whispered a quiet prayer for both of them before heading to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes. The fire, the sound of shattering glass, the heat against her skin. Still, beneath all the noise in her head, there was a strange calm. She had done what she had to do. She didn't think of herself as brave, but deep down, she knew she would have done it again without hesitation. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, waking her gently. She turned on the news while sipping her tea, expecting to see traffic updates or weather reports. Instead, there it was. The story from last night. An unidentified woman is being called a hero after rescuing the young son of billionaire businessman Adrian Hale from a burning car, the reporter said. Her hand froze on the cup. She stared at the screen, stunned. The boy's name appeared in the caption, along with footage of the wreck. The SUV looked even worse in daylight. Then a shaky phone video appeared, her own silhouette breaking the glass, pulling the child out. She turned the TV off quickly, heart pounding. So that's who it was. The man she had seen slumped in the driver's seat was one of the most powerful figures in the country. A man whose face appeared in magazines, whose companies shaped the world of technology. And she had pulled his son from the fire. She sat there in silence, unsure of what to feel. It all seemed surreal. She hadn't even given her name to the reporters. She just wanted to go home that night. But now the world seemed to know. Outside, the morning was calm again, birds singing softly as if nothing had happened. She leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. Whatever came next, she didn't know. But one thing was certain. The life she knew before last night would never be the same again. The following day passed like a blur. She went to work as usual, trying to focus on her patients and routine. But everyone seemed to be talking about the same thing. The story of the mysterious woman who had saved a billionaire's child from a burning car. Some said she was an off-duty nurse. Others said she was a stranger who disappeared before the reporters could find her. No one knew her name. She listened quietly as her co-workers discussed the story in the break room. One nurse showed a short clip on her phone. "Look at this," she said, eyes wide. "Whoever that is, she's fearless." She smiled faintly but said nothing. She didn't want the attention. To her, what she did wasn't about bravery. It was about being human. She couldn't have driven away knowing a child was trapped inside that car. When her shift ended that evening, she walked out of the hospital, the setting sun painting the sky pink and gold. Her body was tired, but her mind was heavy with thoughts. The image of the little boy still lingered in her head, his small hands trembling, his tear-streaked face pressed against her shoulder. She wondered how he was doing now. As she reached the parking lot, she noticed something unusual. A black car was parked near hers, sleek, polished, and clearly expensive. A man in a dark suit stepped out and approached her politely. "Excuse me," he said in a calm voice. "Are you the woman who helped at the accident last night?" She froze for a moment. "Who wants to know?" The man gave a slight bow. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Hale. He would like to meet you personally." Her eyes widened slightly. She had heard that name before, of course. The billionaire whose son she had saved. She looked around, uncertain. "There must be a mistake. I don't know him." The man smiled faintly. "He knows you, miss. Or rather, he knows what you did. Please, there's no pressure. He only wishes to thank you in person." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to refuse. She wasn't comfortable meeting someone that important. But another part of her, the part still haunted by the image of that child, wanted to make sure they were okay. After a short pause, she nodded. "All right, just for a few minutes." The man opened the car door for her. The interior smelled faintly of leather and fresh cologne. The drive was silent except for the low hum of the engine. Her hands rested nervously on her lap as the city lights passed by outside. They stopped at the private wing of a hospital she had never been to before. As they entered, she noticed the quietness. No reporters, no crowd, just a few security guards and nurses moving quietly in the hallways. The man led her to a room at the end of the corridor. Inside, the atmosphere was soft and warm. The boy she had rescued was asleep in a hospital bed, his face peaceful, a stuffed toy resting beside him. Sitting near him was a tall man in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his expression tired but gentle. When he looked up and saw her, he stood immediately. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said softly, "You're the one who saved my son." She hesitated before nodding. "I suppose I was just there at the right time." He shook his head slowly, his voice rough. "No, you were there when no one else was. The doctors told me how close it was. If you hadn't pulled him out when you did..." His voice trailed off. He swallowed hard, visibly holding back emotion. "I don't even know how to begin thanking you." She looked down, feeling shy under his gaze. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." He gave a quiet, almost sad smile. "You'd be surprised how many people would have stood back and waited for help instead of running into a burning car." There was silence for a moment, filled only by the sound of the heart monitor beeping softly beside the child's bed. He took a step closer, still speaking gently. "When I woke up in this hospital and realized my son was alive, the first thing I asked was who saved him. They told me it was a woman who didn't even give her name. I couldn't rest until I found you." She felt her throat tighten slightly. His voice carried both exhaustion and deep gratitude. She could see now that behind his calm, polished appearance was a father who had been terrified of losing the person he loved most. "I'm glad he's all right," she said softly. "That's all that matters." He nodded, his eyes glistening a little. "You risked your life for someone you didn't even know. That's something I'll never forget." The child stirred a little, opening his eyes halfway. When he saw her, he smiled sleepily and reached out a small hand. She walked closer, kneeling beside him, and he whispered something faintly, a sound of recognition. She brushed his hair gently and smiled back. Seeing them together made something shift in the man's expression. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, a quiet realization that sometimes the most extraordinary people come from the simplest places. After a few minutes, a nurse entered to check the boy's vitals and she stood up to leave. "I should go," she said quietly. "You both need rest." But as she turned to walk away, he spoke again. "Wait," she looked back. "I know you said you don't want thanks," he said carefully. "But please let me do something for you, anything, just name it." She shook her head gently. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just happy he's safe." He looked down for a moment, then said softly, "You saved my world that night. If you ever need help, any kind of help, and you'll find me ready." His words were sincere and she could feel it. She simply smiled and replied, "Take care of him. That's all I need to know." Then she left the room quietly. Outside, she walked down the hallway feeling strange, not sad, not happy, but deeply moved. The image of the little boy's smile stayed with her the whole way home. The next morning, the world seemed to have discovered who she was. Her phone was full of messages. Some people wanted interviews, others wanted to offer donations or ask for her story. The hospital where she worked had even received calls from reporters. She tried to ignore the noise. Fame wasn't something she ever wanted. All she wanted was to go back to her normal life. But normal wasn't going to come easily. That afternoon, she received a call from the same man in the dark suit. "Mr. Hale insists on one more meeting," he said politely. "He would like to see you, not for publicity, but privately." At first, she wanted to refuse, but curiosity tugged at her again, and a small part of her, the part that had seen the father's eyes fill with gratitude, wanted to know what he wanted to say. So she agreed. This time, the car didn't take her to the hospital. Instead, it stopped in front of a tall glass building in the heart of the city. The place looked more like a museum than an office. Clean, quiet, with soft music playing in the background. She was led to a private lounge on the top floor. He was already there, dressed simply, sitting by a window that overlooked the skyline. He stood up as she entered. "I didn't mean to bother you again," he said kindly, "but I needed to see you outside that hospital room and to talk properly." She nodded, sitting across from him. The silence between them was calm but heavy with unspoken things. "I've been thinking a lot since that night," he began slowly, "about what matters, about what I've been missing." He paused, glancing at the window. "I've spent years building companies, earning money, being surrounded by people who only see what I have. But you didn't care who I was. You just saw a person in danger." She listened quietly, unsure how to respond. "I want to do something meaningful," he continued. "Not for me, but because what you did reminded me that goodness still exists. I'd like your help with that. Maybe something that could save more lives." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "You're a nurse. You understand emergencies better than anyone. What if we started a community program? Free training for people to handle accidents, fires, anything like that. It could save others the way you saved my son." She stared at him, surprised. She hadn't expected that at all. It wasn't money or fame he was offering. It was purpose. "I don't know much about business," she said slowly. "You don't need to," he replied. "You just need to do what you already do best, help people." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. There was sincerity in his voice, the kind that couldn't be faked. "I'll think about it," she said softly. He smiled. "That's all I ask." As she left his office that day, something inside her felt lighter. The world had changed around her in just a few days, and she didn't know where this new path would lead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe something good was waiting just ahead. That night, as she sat by her window watching the city lights, she thought about how everything had started. One moment of courage, one life saved, and now a door to something entirely new opening before her. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain, that sometimes one small act of bravery can change not just one life, but many. The next few days went by quietly, but something inside her had changed. Life at the hospital continued as usual. The same white hallways, the same sounds of machines beeping and pages being called over the speakers. Yet her thoughts often drifted to the meeting she had with the billionaire. She still couldn't believe it had happened. Everything felt surreal. From the moment she had seen that burning car to standing face to face with one of the most powerful men in the country. But what stayed with her most wasn't his wealth or fame. It was the way he had looked at his son, the way his voice had cracked with emotion when he said thank you. It reminded her that deep down, everyone, no matter how rich or important, could be fragile when it came to the people they loved. One afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "This is from Mr. Hale's office. He'd like to invite you to lunch tomorrow if you're free." She hesitated. Part of her felt nervous. Another part, though, was curious. He had spoken about starting a program, something to train ordinary people to handle emergencies, and the idea had stayed in her mind ever since. She thought of all the lives that could be saved if more people knew what to do in those first few minutes after an accident. After a few moments of thinking, she replied simply, "Yes, I'll come." The next day, she found herself walking into a quiet restaurant in the city's center. It was the kind of place she'd never been to before. Peaceful, elegant, with soft music and walls made of glass that let the sunlight pour in. A waiter led her to a private corner table where he was already waiting. He stood as she approached, giving a warm smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted, smiling a little. Not really my kind of place. He chuckled softly. Mine either, actually. I usually eat at my office. But I thought it would be better to talk somewhere quiet. As they sat down, she noticed he looked different this time. Calmer, less guarded than before. He asked about her work, her background, and how she had learned to stay so calm in a crisis. She told him stories from her years in the hospital, moments where seconds made the difference between life and death. He listened closely, not interrupting once. When she finished, he said, "You have something rare. Most people panic when things go wrong. You act," she shrugged. "I guess when you see people fight for their lives every day, you stop hesitating. You just do what you have to." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly the kind of spirit I want this program to have. Not fancy, not complicated, just real training for real people. You'd be perfect to help design it." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Me? I've never done anything like that." "You don't need experience," he said quickly. "You just need heart. The rest we'll figure out together." There was something sincere in the way he said it that made her believe him. She felt a quiet excitement stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't had in years. They spent the rest of the lunch discussing ideas, from teaching basic first aid to running rescue simulations for communities that couldn't afford such training. He took notes as she spoke, asking thoughtful questions, and she found herself talking more than she expected. When lunch ended, he stood and said, "I'll have my team contact you to set up the first planning meeting. And thank you, Mike, for saying yes." As she walked out into the sunlight, she couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't about working with a billionaire or starting a new project. It was about finally doing something meaningful beyond her daily job. Something that could actually make a difference on a larger scale. In the weeks that followed, they met several times. At first, it was all business. Discussions about logistics, funding, training modules, and community outreach. But gradually, their conversations became more personal. He began to open up about his own life, how his wife had passed away when their son was very young, and how he had buried himself in work afterward, convincing himself that success could fill the emptiness. But it hadn't. She listened quietly each time he spoke, never judging, never offering empty comfort. She just listened, and that alone seemed to help him more than words could. He, in turn, learned about her life too, the long hours, the sacrifices, the quiet loneliness of living alone in a small apartment after spending the day caring for others. He admired her strength but also saw the quiet weariness behind her eyes. One evening, after a long day of planning sessions, they found themselves standing on the rooftop of his office building. The city lights stretched endlessly around them, the air cool and still. "It's strange," he said softly, leaning on the railing. "Before that night, I thought my life was full. I had money, power, everything I thought mattered. But none of it could have saved my son. You did that, and without expecting anything." She looked at him, then out at the lights below. "Sometimes life gives you one moment to prove who you are. I just happened to be there when it happened." He turned to her, his voice low. "I think fate put you there." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world below seemed far away. There was only the quiet night and the unspoken understanding between them. Two people from completely different worlds, connected by one extraordinary moment. As time went on, the program began to take shape. They launched the first pilot session at a local community center. Dozens of volunteers showed up, eager to learn. She led the training, demonstrating CPR, fire safety, and basic rescue steps. Watching ordinary people learn to save lives filled her with a pride she hadn't felt before. After the session, he came up to her, clapping lightly. "You were incredible," he said. "They listened to every word like you were born to teach." She laughed softly. "I'm just glad they showed up. Maybe this will actually work." "It will," he said confidently, "because you believe in it." Their friendship grew stronger over the next few months. He often visited the hospital where she worked, sometimes bringing coffee just to talk. The staff whispered when they saw him. Everyone recognized the billionaire from the news, but he never acted like he was someone important. Around her, he was simply a grateful father and a man who wanted to do something good. One night, as they packed up after a long meeting, he looked at her and said quietly, "Do you ever think about how one moment can change everything?" She smiled faintly. "All the time. I think about that road, that fire. If I had been a few minutes late or if I had been too tired to stop, everything would have been different." He nodded slowly. For both of us. There was something in his tone that made her heart beat a little faster, though she didn't know why. In the following weeks, she noticed small changes in her own life. She laughed more. She felt lighter. The long shifts at the hospital didn't drain her the way they used to. There was always something to look forward to, a meeting, a call, a message about new progress in their project. But not everyone understood. Her coworkers teased her gently, saying she'd found a secret admirer. She laughed it off, insisting it wasn't like that. Yet deep inside, she couldn't ignore the warmth she felt whenever he smiled at her, or the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. One evening, after a particularly busy day, she received a call from him. His voice sounded tired but gentle. "I was wondering, would you and I have dinner tomorrow? Not about work this time, just dinner." For a second, she was silent. Then she said softly, "All right." The next night, they met at a small restaurant near the coast. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with the sound of waves in the background. They talked for hours, not about the project or the past, but about life. Simple things like favorite meals, books they'd read, childhood memories. At one point, he said quietly, "You've brought light into my life again. I didn't realize how much I needed someone who sees the world the way you do." She looked down, feeling her cheeks warm. "I'm not sure I've done anything that special," he smiled. "You've done more than you know." The sound of the waves filled the silence between them. Neither of them said anything more, but in that quiet moment, both understood that something had changed. When she went home that night, she sat on her balcony for a long time, listening to the city sounds fading into the distance. She thought about everything that had happened since that one night. The crash, the rescue, the meetings, the unexpected bond that had grown between two people who should have never crossed paths. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. Something deeper was forming, something she couldn't quite name but could feel in her heart. Whatever it was, she knew it was real. And she also knew this was only the beginning of a story she never expected to live. The next morning, she woke up thinking the chaos from the previous day was finally over. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly on her jacket, reminding her that what she had done wasn't a dream. She had actually pulled a child out of a burning car. It was something she couldn't stop replaying in her mind, even as she tried to get ready for work. Every detail, the sound of the crackling fire, the terrified cry of the toddler, the weight of the little boy in her arms here, it all came back in flashes. She didn't know that life was about to take another turn. That afternoon, as she stepped out of her small apartment to throw away the trash, she noticed a black car parked across the street. It wasn't the kind of car that belonged in her quiet neighborhood. The windows were tinted, the surface shone like polished glass, and a man in a suit stood beside it looking directly at her. At first, she thought it must be a coincidence. Maybe the man was lost or waiting for someone, but then he walked toward her and said her name politely, asking if she was the woman who had rescued a child from an accident 2 nights ago. Her heart skipped a beat. She nodded, unsure what to say. The man handed her an envelope with a simple message inside, a short handwritten note. It read, "Please meet me. I owe you more than words can say." It was signed with the name of the billionaire everyone had been talking about on the news, the father of the toddler she had saved. She stood there frozen for a few seconds, reading the note again and again. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She wasn't the type to seek recognition. In her mind, she had just done what anyone would do in that moment. She didn't want money or fame. She only wanted to know that the little boy was safe. Still, something about the note felt sincere. She agreed to meet him the next day at the hospital where his son was recovering. When she arrived, she expected a grand scene, reporters, cameras, or maybe a public thank you. But the hallway outside the private ward was quiet. A nurse led her to a room where the man stood by the window, his back turned, looking out at the city. He turned when he heard her footsteps. For a moment, she didn't know what to expect. In her mind, billionaires were distant people surrounded by walls of money and luxury. But this man looked nothing like that image. His face was tired, his clothes simple. There were dark circles under his eyes, and when he smiled faintly, it was the kind of smile that carried too much pain behind it. He thanked her softly, not in a rehearsed or public way, but with a kind of emotion that made her chest tighten. "You didn't just save my son," he said. "You saved the only family I have left." She didn't know how to respond. Words suddenly felt small. He walked closer, his voice breaking slightly as he explained how his wife had passed away a few years earlier, and how his little boy was the only thing that kept him going. The thought of losing him in that accident had been unbearable. He told her that when he saw the security footage from the scene, her pulling the boy from the flames, he couldn't stop crying. He said he wanted to do something for her, anything at all. "Tell me what you want," he said gently. "Money, a house, a job, name it. I can make it happen," but she shook her head. "I don't want anything," she said quietly. "I just wanted to make sure your son was safe." He seemed surprised. People didn't often say no to him, but her refusal made him look at her with more respect than before. It was as if he suddenly saw her not as a stranger, but as someone genuine, someone who didn't want to gain from another's pain. They talked for a while longer. The conversation turned lighter as they spoke about small things: her work, his son's recovery, the way the boy had started smiling again. When the little child woke up and saw her standing there, his eyes lit up. He reached out his tiny hands and whispered a few broken words that made everyone in the room emotional. The moment felt real and pure. As she left the hospital that day, she thought it would be the last time she'd see them, but she was wrong. A few days later, she got another message. This time it was from the billionaire himself, asking if she would join him and his son for lunch. Just a simple thank you meal. She hesitated, but eventually said yes. The lunch was quiet at first. They met at a small cafe away from the public eye, the kind of place where no one expected to see a man of his status. He seemed more relaxed there, even laughing a little when his son spilled juice on the table. She watched him carefully wipe it away, his movements gentle, his attention fully on the boy. It was clear that he wasn't just a businessman or a billionaire. He was a father who deeply loved his child. Over time, that lunch turned into more meetings. Not planned ones, just small gestures. Sometimes he would visit the hospital when she was on duty and bring coffee for the staff. Other times he would invite her to walk with him and his son in the park. It was never about wealth or power. It was about connection, something both of them had been missing for a long time. He started opening up more. He told her how success had come at a cost. He had built an empire but lost touch with the world beyond his office walls. His son barely saw him before the accident. The crash had shaken him in a way no business failure ever could. "It made me realize how fragile life is," he said one evening, "and how easily we forget what really matters." She listened quietly. She didn't judge him or try to comfort him with empty words. Instead, she shared small pieces of her own story, how she had grown up with very little, how she had learned to work hard, and how she believed that kindness was the only thing that truly made life meaningful. The more they talked, the more he found himself drawn to her honesty. She wasn't impressed by his money or his fame. She never asked for anything. She treated him like a regular person, something no one else seemed to do. Weeks passed and their friendship deepened. His son adored her, always running into her arms whenever she visited. It warmed her heart to see how the child had healed so fast, not just physically, but emotionally too. One evening, as the sun was setting, the billionaire looked at her and said softly, "You've changed more than just my son's life. You've changed mine." She didn't know what to say. He went on to explain how since the accident he had been trying to find ways to repay her kindness, but he realized there was no material gift that could match what she had given him. A second chance at life, at love, and at being a father. That night, he offered her something different, not money, but a partnership. He wanted to start a foundation in her name, to support emergency response training for ordinary citizens, to help others learn how to save lives just as she had. At first, she thought it was too big an idea. But as he spoke, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't doing it to look good for the media. He truly wanted to make a difference, and so she agreed. The following months were filled with planning, meetings, and ideas. For the first time, she felt like her life had real direction. She wasn't just helping one person at a time. She was helping to create something that could touch thousands of lives. The billionaire worked alongside her, but never treated her as someone beneath him. He listened to her ideas, respected her opinions, and supported her decisions. Their connection grew stronger every day, built not on wealth or power, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. Sometimes, when they walked out of a meeting together, people stared, surprised to see a man like him talking so warmly with a woman who lived such a simple life. But neither of them cared. Their friendship became something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable. It wasn't about romance or grand gestures. It was about two people who had met through tragedy and somehow healed each other along the way. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, she realized that the note he had sent her that first day, the one that said, "I owe you more than words can say," had come true in a way she never imagined. He didn't just repay her with gratitude. He gave her a purpose, a place in his world, and something far more valuable than money: trust and understanding. And even though she had never asked for anything in return, life had given her something beautiful, proof that one act of courage can change more than just a single life. It can open doors to unexpected friendships, healing, and hope. Months passed, and life had started to feel different for both of them. What began as a single act of courage on a dark road had grown into something much deeper, something no one could have predicted. The foundation they built together had started gaining attention. People admired how it focused on training ordinary citizens to respond in emergencies. There were workshops, online lessons, and small community programs spreading across towns. She loved watching people walk into those sessions nervous and unsure, and leave with confidence that they could save a life someday. The billionaire rarely appeared at public events, but for this cause, he showed up. Every time he stood beside her at a press conference or training day, he let her take the spotlight. "This was your idea," he'd whisper quietly before they walked onto the stage. "You're the reason this exists." She never saw herself as a hero. Even when people came up to her with gratitude or tears, she always said the same thing: that she was just in the right place at the right time. But deep down, she knew this work had changed her. The woman who once lived quietly, unnoticed, now found herself standing in front of crowds, sharing a message that mattered. The billionaire's son, the little boy she had rescued, had become like family to her. He would run to her every time he saw her, wrapping his tiny arms around her legs. His laughter had become the sound she looked forward to the most. She often thought about how close they had come to losing him, and it reminded her why she did what she did. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings and training sessions, she sat in the park with the child, watching him chase pigeons near the fountain. The billionaire arrived a few minutes later, looking more relaxed than usual. He carried 2 cups of coffee and smiled as he sat beside her. "You know," he said softly, "it feels like I've been given a second chance, not just with my son, but with everything." She looked at him, sensing something different in his tone. He continued, "Before that accident, I was living on autopilot. Everything was about numbers, meetings, and deals. I thought success meant building bigger companies, making more money. But the truth is, I didn't even realize what I was missing until that night." She stayed quiet, listening as he spoke. His voice was calm, but his words carried a deep truth, the kind that comes only from living through something that shakes your soul. He glanced at her, then at his son playing in the distance. "I think you came into our lives for a reason," he said. "Not just to save him, but to remind me what it means to live again." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the fountain and the child's laughter filled the air between them. She smiled faintly and said, "Maybe we both needed a reminder." He looked at her and nodded. From that day on, their bond became even stronger. They still worked together on the foundation, but their connection had grown beyond that. It wasn't about status or gratitude, or even destiny. It was about 2 people who had walked through different kinds of pain and somehow found healing in each other's company. Sometimes they would talk late into the evening after meetings, sharing stories about their childhoods or dreams they never had the courage to chase. She told him how she once wanted to travel but never had the money or time. He told her how, despite all his wealth, he often felt lonely, surrounded by people but rarely understood. He had everything money could buy, but she had something he couldn't find anywhere else: sincerity. She treated him like a person, not a name. She never saw the billionaire, only the father, the man who worried about bedtime stories and scraped knees. One evening, they attended a charity gala together for the foundation. The room was filled with well-dressed guests, flashing cameras, and polite conversations. She felt out of place at first, but he stayed by her side the whole time. When people came up to thank her for her bravery, he watched her with quiet admiration. During the speeches, one of the event hosts called her onto the stage to say a few words. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the microphone, but she spoke from the heart. She told the crowd how she wasn't special, just someone who couldn't stand by when she saw someone in danger. She reminded everyone that kindness didn't require wealth or fame, only courage. When she stepped down from the stage, the billionaire was waiting for her near the corner of the hall. His eyes were softer than usual. "You're incredible," he said quietly. "Do you know that?" She laughed shyly. "I just spoke what I felt." "That's what makes it incredible," he replied. That night, as they walked out together, the sky was clear, the city lights glowing like scattered stars. He stopped for a moment looking at her. "You've changed my world," he said. "You didn't just save my son. You saved me from a life that had no meaning." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. The honesty in his voice was disarming. Then he smiled faintly and said, "I think we both saved each other." After that night, life began to settle into something quietly beautiful. Their days were filled with work, laughter, and small moments that mattered more than anything grand. Sometimes she'd spend evenings at his home, helping the little boy with his drawings while he worked nearby. The child always drew three figures, himself, his father, and her, holding hands. It made her heart melt every time. One morning, she received a message asking her to come to the community center where the foundation had started its first program. When she arrived, she was surprised to find the place decorated with photos, banners, and people waiting with flowers. The billionaire stood near the front smiling. "What's all this?" she asked, stunned. He walked toward her, holding a small box in his hand. "Today marks 1 year since you saved my son," he said softly. "I wanted to celebrate it differently, not as a reminder of the accident, but as the day 3 lives were given a new beginning." Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace shaped like a flame, a symbol of the fire she had walked through and conquered. Tears filled her eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "But I wanted to. You've given us so much more than you'll ever realize." For a moment, the crowd around them disappeared. It was just the two of them standing there, the noise fading into quiet warmth. That day marked more than an anniversary. It marked the start of something new, a promise to keep living with purpose, kindness, and connection. As months passed, the foundation continued to grow. People across cities began forming their own volunteer teams. Her story inspired others to believe that one act of courage could ripple through countless lives. And every time she stood before a new group of trainees, she reminded them, "You don't need to be a hero. You just need to care enough to act." Her bond with the billionaire and his son never faded. They became family, not by blood but by choice. She was there for birthdays, school events, and quiet evenings at home. The little boy often called her his guardian angel, though she always laughed and said she was just a friend. But deep down, she knew that fate had tied their lives together in ways no one could explain. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a hill overlooking the city, the billionaire turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think everything in life was about timing and control. But now I think some things just happen. Like meeting you. It wasn't planned. It was meant." She smiled, looking at the horizon where the sky burned orange and gold. "Maybe it was," she said softly. The air was calm, filled with the sound of the little boy's laughter behind them. It was a simple moment. No headlines, no spotlight. Just 3 people whose lives had crossed paths in the most unexpected way. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary stories don't come from power or fame. They come from ordinary people who act with heart when it matters most. She didn't ask for recognition or reward. She only followed her instincts that night, not knowing it would lead to a journey that changed her life, and theirs, forever. It all began with a single act of courage on a dark road, and ended with a new beginning filled with hope, gratitude, and love.